in the suburbs west of Northborough, in a soon-to-be-abandoned three-story house. It originally belonged to the Backland Medical School, but the latter's main campus had now moved to a better and more suitable location, leaving behind only a small number of teaching staff and students who were left guarding the area after failing to graduate. Audrey was wearing a white gown and white mask. Her smooth blonde hair was also coiled up and stuffed under a cool-coloured surgical cap. She darted her eyes to the side and looked at Force Wall, who was dressed in the same way. She always felt that Force had a special temperament that seemed to make her more suited to such attires than herself. It's the kind of temperament that allows her to pick up a scalpel and cut open a patient's stomach at any moment. Audrey didn't say anything. She followed half a step behind Force as they entered the classroom in front of them. She was startled by the information she had received from Force, because Mr. Fool had said it was a simple task. Considering that the simplicity of said task might be from Mr. Fool's point of view, Audrey took advantage of the moment when she was alone, changing into a disguise, to recite his honourable name and silently pray, so as to report everything that had exactly happened. However, she had yet to receive a response. After passing through the door and entering a room, Audrey instinctively looked around and found that this wasn't an ordinary classroom. There were actually 4 skeletal specimens and 4 coffins made of glass. The coffins were filled with pale naked corpses that were soaked in preserving agents. At the very top of the classroom, there was a transparent glass pillar that was also filled with a liquid. Floating inside was a male corpse that wore a black scholarly robe. The corpse's clothes stuck tightly to its body, giving off an extremely heavy feeling. He didn't relax and simply floated upright in the middle. It's as if he had died by drowning instead of being placed in there after his death. Audrey made a preliminary judgment based on her attitude as a spectator. In addition, she saw a number of men in white coats, white masks, and surgical caps sitting around the long tables in the room. None of them said a word, just like the bodies and bones around them. Looking out at the crimson moon which had finally peeked out of the gloomy darkness, Audrey turned her head back to look at the scene inside the classroom. For a moment, she couldn't help but shudder as this place instilled an instinctive fear. But at the same time, she felt excited and agitated. This is what the life of a beyonder should be, Audrey silently muttered to herself as she followed Force to a corner before sitting down. After waiting for a while, the floating black-clothed male corpse inside the upright glass pillar at the front of the classroom suddenly opened his eyes. His voice transmitting through the layers of obstructions. Let's begin. East Borough, Daravai Street. In his dusty greyish-blue worker uniform and cap, he walked along the dark streets that only had a few gas lamps that were still working. There was candlelight shining down from the various apartments on both sides of the street. This was combined with the crimson moonlight that passed through the clouds with great difficulty, and they barely outlined the silhouettes of the pedestrians. Klein encountered people with old, tattered clothes, their faces numb with despair. They were the homeless who had been chased away by the police. They had no place to sleep, so they wandered aimlessly through the streets. Occasionally, they would find some inconspicuous corner or park bench to rest at for a while, but they were soon chased away again. In the cold and dark night, Klein felt that they were more like zombies than the zombies he had seen, and the entire East Borough was more like an abyss than the legendary abyss. He hurriedly took a quick breath which hurt his throat, causing him to cough involuntarily. He quickly gathered his thoughts and looked through the corner of his eyes at the apartment on the corner of the street. It had obviously suffered from an explosion and hadn't been repaired yet. The best place to monitor the crime scene is the apartment across the street. The 3rd and 4th story and the roof all meet these requirements. Klein analyzed the situation with the knowledge he had learned as an talk. Throughout the whole process, he didn't slow down his pace to avoid arousing suspicion. At the end of the street, Klein smoothly crossed the apartment building numbered 1 and entered the building across the street from the crime scene. The one-bedroom apartment he had rented in East Borough was similar to this apartment. And he had also lived in an apartment of slightly higher class with his brother Benson and sister Melissa in Tingen City for quite a long time. It was Klein's personal experience, but it also came from the memory fragments of the original Klein. As his thoughts raced, Klein lowered his cap, lowered his head, and without rushing, he walked up the creaking stairs to the 3rd floor. Due to his unlucky encounter in the evening, he no longer had a revolver, so all he could do was stick one hand into his pocket and hold a few tarot cards in between his fingers. There was no light other than the faint moonlight in the corridor of the 3rd floor. Klein was in no hurry to move forward, so he carefully observed the layout. The spot directly across the crime scene is on the left. The one with the best view for surveillance should be the 3rd room. From here, Klein began to walk slowly and carefully. After walking past 2 rooms, he also inserted his right hand into his pocket and gently opened the iron cigarette case. After a split second, his fingers touched the old black eye, and the murmurs resounded in his ears as they attempted to tear his mind apart. At the same time, with the help of this corrupted item, Klein saw many strange black lines. These thin lines floated in the air, and although they were intertwined and entangled a little, he could still distinguish who they belonged to if he traced them back to the source. The corresponding figures were reflected in Klein's soon-to-be-cooked brain. There were men, women, and children sleeping in the bunk beds, and several tenants lying in bed on the floor. Other than that, there were no other special spots, nor were there any hidden figures. The illusion in front of him and the auditory hallucination in his ears slowly improved as Klein quickly retracted his hand from the old black eye. he endured the pain as he continued to move forward. Once he felt some relief, he would immediately observe the other room. Unfortunately, his efforts of searching the entire apartment to see if there were any places that allowed the observation of the crime scene was in vain. Few Klein cowered in a corner of the balcony. His hands were on his knees as he panted heavily. Tears streamed from the corners of his eyes, and from time to time, his nose would run as if he had fallen sick. This was the result of his repeated contact with the all-black eye within a short period of time. Even with Klein's resistance in this area, he wasn't completely immune to it. The only thing that satisfied him was that it only agitated him and didn't corrupt him. Otherwise, he would have given up long ago and wouldn't have dared to try again. That would have led directly to devolving into madness. After resting for a while, Klein finally calmed down and switched to a different apartment that didn't have the same view as this one, but it was still for naught. Did I interpret it wrong? The clues are at the scene of the crime. When Klein returned to the street, he looked suspiciously out of the corner of his eye at the apartment with traces of an explosion. With the mindset of just giving it a try, he put his hand back into his pocket, pushed the metal cigarette case open, and stuck his hand inside. He wanted to see if anyone was hiding in the apartment where the crime scene was located. With a hum, Klein's head suddenly felt like it was being smashed as his body wobbled a little. Like a drunkard, he staggered forward and looked at the apartment, which had signs of an explosion. As he was too far away, he couldn't clearly see the black lines, nor could he trace the source of the black lines. He could only barely distinguish where the black lines had gathered, and this indicated that there was someone present. No, Klein quickly swept the area and made a rough judgment. Suddenly, he noticed a black line floating out from the crime scene on the third floor which merged into the air. This Klein's pupils shrank, and he made a confirmation before quickly withdrawing his hands so as to stop being in contact with the all-black eye. There's someone in the destroyed room. That murderer is actually crazy enough to wait for investigators to come to the crime scene. Isn't he afraid that official beyonders will take over the case? I made a wrong judgment and failed to find him because I shared a different sense of logic from that of a lunatic. Many thoughts flashed through Klein's mind as he slowly exhaled and pretended that nothing had happened whilst he walked in a circle until he reached the entrance of the apartment building. By then, all the negative effects he had suffered from the all-black eye had been quelled. Controlling his facial expression and body language, Klein headed up to the third floor as if he were going home, his footsteps quick and heavy with fatigue. In the darkness of the corridor, he caught sight of the doorless room which had half its walls collapsed. Then, he casually headed for the public bathroom. As he neared the room, his hand, which had been in his pocket, touched the all-black eye. Again, the mind-wrecking murmurs and the blurred hallucinations assaulted him. Through the corners of his eyes, Klein saw a black, illusory thread spread out from the crime scene. As he traced the source, he found a man who had completely merged into the shadows. His aura was the same color. The man was extremely tall, almost 2 meters in height. The corners of his mouth drooped slightly, making him appear rather eccentric. His cold eyes were like those of a wild beast, possessing a ferocity that couldn't be hidden. It's not Lanny. Thus Klein withdrew his fingers, relaxed his body, and avoided the likelihood of staring. He entered the public bathroom at the end of the corridor without stopping. Nor did he alarm the man. The public bathroom and the crime scene went on the same side. He wiped off his cold sweat, and after quelling the negative effects, he directly jumped out the window, climbing down skillfully before leaving with brisk steps. He didn't stay a moment longer. He knew that in a few minutes the man would be alerted to the absence of someone who had gone to the bathroom, so he had to get as far away from the street as possible. It wasn't that Klein didn't want to walk back the way he came from, but if he didn't know which room he could go to, it would similarly expose him. The clown quickly ran and circled around a huge area before entering that one-bedroom apartment he had rented in East Borough. He then went above the grey fog to confirm that there was no danger of him being caught. That fellow must have had some sort of deep connection with Lanivas. After a moment's thought, Klein conjured a portrait of the man from earlier, sending his thoughts to the crimson star that represented Miss Justice. Soon after, he said solemnly in a tone of authority, "This is a clue, inside the soon-to-be-abandoned medical school building." Audrey suddenly felt the drift as she took a detour to leave the gathering which had just ended. She saw the familiar thick grey fog and the blurry figure situated in the centre high above. "This is a clue." Accompanying Mr. Fool's solemn voice were scenes that looked like a film reel, a coloured one at that. A man who wasn't particularly muscular, but was nearly 2 meters tall in height, was wearing a black priest robe and standing in the shadows. His light yellow hair was slightly curled, and his dark brown eyes were cold with malice. The corners of his mouth drooped slightly, making him look like a ferocious wolf. A clue to the bombing on East Borough's Device Street and Gavin's drowning. Is this the murderer? Audrey stared blankly for a moment before immediately coming to an understanding. Mr. Fool already has a clue. He's really impressive. No, he's omnipotent. After sighing to herself, she turned to look at Force. As soon as Force removed her mask and surgical cap and got into the carriage, she noticed Miss Audrey's slightly strange gaze. She immediately asked in puzzlement, "Is there something on my face?" Nope. Audrey looked away and sat down before removing her disguise. Force recalled the gathering and asked curiously, Miss Audrey, why didn't you announce that you were purchasing the Spectator formula? You could have established contact with the psychology alchemists that way. She remembered that the generous Miss Audrey had remained silent most of the time and only sold some spirituality-infused materials and responded to buying other varieties accordingly. Audrey smiled faintly and said, This is my first gathering in this circle. I think it's more important to observe and wait. I'm looking forward to the potion formula and even more so, the mystical items, but I told myself that there's no rush. It would be a better strategy to familiarize myself before taking action. This is also a professional habit of the Spectator pathway. Moreover, there were no beyonder ingredients like dark patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or Spring of the Elves marrow crystals, which Mr. World wishes to obtain. Audrey silently added. Looking at the girl who wasn't 18 yet, Force suddenly felt that she was more mature than ever before. She suddenly laughed at herself and said, If I had been like you back then, I wouldn't have wasted such a precious opportunity. Audrey gave a reserved smile as a response before saying, I asked some special friends in the morning if they have any leads on the Rabbi Street bombing. Wait for the information at the same place with Xio. All right, Force nodded without any doubts. Instead of returning to Minsk Street, Klein slept in the one-bedroom apartment in East Borough's Black Palm Street. He was afraid that the suspected murderer in the black priest robe had accomplices who could be searching the streets for him. Although the probability of meeting him wasn't high, and he had disguised himself ahead of time so that it was unlikely he could be recognized, his divination indicated that there was a possibility. To be cautious, Klein made do and decided to spend the night at East Borough. At dawn, he changed into another dark blue worker's uniform, put on a light brown cap, and left the room. He went down the stairs and into the street. At that moment, the white fog with a yellowish tint shrouded the surroundings. There were blurry figures of people passing by, and the cold morning air was soaking into their clothes. Klein lowered his head and hurried along, just like the people around him who had gotten up early for work. While walking, he saw a man in his 40s or 50s ahead of him. He wore a thick jacket and had grey hair around his temples. He was pacing in place and fumbling for a cigarette while shivering. Finally, he took out a box of empty matches and his clothes in a pocket. Just as he opened the matchbox, his right hand quivered, and the crumpled cigarette fell to the ground and rolled in front of Klein. Klein stopped, picked it up, and handed it to him. Thank you, I can't live without this old friend. There's only a few left. The man thanked him sincerely and accepted the cigarette. His face was pale, and he appeared to not have shaved for quite a while. Exhaustion was expressed without reserve from the corner of his eyes as he lamented, I haven't slept for another night. I don't know how long I can last. I hope the Lord will bless me so that I can enter the workhouse today. He's a homeless person who has been chased away. Klein casually asked, why doesn't the king and ministers allow all of you to sleep in the park? Who knows, but to sleep in this kind of weather outside, it's very likely that you'll never wake up again. It's still better in the day, since you can find a warmer place. Sigh, but this will make us lack the time or strength to look for jobs. The man lit a cigarette and sucked at it delightfully. As though he had some of his strength restored, and he walked beside Klein. It was uncertain if his destination was at the end of the fog or somewhere deep into the fog. Klein had no intention of exchanging pleasantries and was about to speed away from him when he saw the man, who had spoken clearly, bend down and pick up the dark object from the ground. It looked like an apple core that had been nibbled clean. The man swallowed his saliva before stuffing the dirt-covered fruit core into his mouth. He chewed it until it was mashed up before swallowing it down with great familiarity. Nothing was left. Looking at Klein's surprised eyes, he wiped his mouth, shrugged his shoulders, and smiled bitterly. I haven't eaten in almost 3 days. This sentence struck Klein's heart, causing him to feel indescribably moved. He silently sighed and said with a smile, Sorry, I didn't introduce myself just now. I'm a reporter, and I'm currently writing about homeless people. Can I interview you? Let's go to the cafe up front. The man froze for a moment before he smiled and said, No problem, it's much warmer inside than on the streets. If you can stay a little bit longer after the interview and let me sleep inside for half an hour, no, 15 minutes. That would be even better. Klein turned agape, momentarily at a loss for words. He just silently led his interviewee into the budget cafe at the end of the street. The tables and chairs in the coffee shop were quite greasy. Due to the walls and windows inside, there were quite a few guests. The average temperature was indeed much higher than the streets. The man scratched his throat, concealing his Adam's apple that was squirming from the fragrance. Klein motioned for him to sit down and went to order 2 large cups of tea, a plate of lamb stewed with young peas, 2 loaves of bread, 2 pieces of toast, a serving of low-quality butter, and a serving of artificial cream for a total of 17.5 pence. Have some food to eat. We'll have the interview after you eat your fill. Once the food was ready, Klein carried them back to their table. This is for me, the man asked with anticipation and surprise. Except for a piece of toast and a cup of tea, the rest is yours, Klein smiled in response. The man wiped his eyes and said with a slightly choked voice, Why, you truly are a kind-hearted person. After starving for so long, make sure not to eat too quickly, Klein warned. I know, I had an old buddy who died just like that. The middle-aged man worked hard at eating at a slower pace, occasionally lifting his cup of tea and gulping it down. Klein easily finished the toast and watched quietly, waiting for the man to finish his meal. Phew, I haven't eaten until I was this full in 3 months, no half a year. In the workhouse, the food they give is just enough. After a while, the man put down his spoon, leaving empty plates in front of him. Pretending to be a journalist, Klein asked casually, "How did you become a vagabond?" "It was bad luck. I was originally a worker leading quite a good life. I had a wife, 2 cute children, a boy and a girl, but a few years ago, an infectious disease took them away, and I also stayed in the hospital for a long period of time, losing my job, my wealth, and my family in the process. From then on, I often couldn't find a job, and I didn't have any money to rent a house or buy food. All I could do was wander on the different streets and in certain parks. This made me very weak, making it harder for me to find a job." The man spoke with a hint of nostalgia and sadness in his numbness. He took a sip of his tea, sighed, and spoke again. "I can only wait for an opportunity to enter the workhouse, but as you know, every workhouse only takes in a limited number of people. With good luck, and if I queue up in time, I can spend a few days in peace, recover my strength a little, and then find a temporary job. Yay, temporary. Soon, I'll be jobless again and the previous process will be repeated. I have no idea how much longer I can last like that. I should have been a good worker." Klein thought for a moment and asked, "How many cigarettes do you have left?" "Not many left." The middle-aged man smiled bitterly. "This is the last of my assets, the only thing I have left after I was chased out by the landlord. Hey, one can't bring them into the workhouses, but I'll secretly hide them in the seams of my clothes. I'll only take one out to smoke during my worst hardships so that I can have some hope. I don't know how long I can last, but let me tell you, I was a good worker back then." Klein wasn't a professional journalist and was momentarily at a loss on what to ask. He turned his head to look out the window and saw faces with obvious hunger plastered across them. Some of them were relatively sober, and they belonged to the residents of East Borough. Some of them wore looks of numbness and exhaustion, nothing like that of humans. They were vagabonds. There is no obvious gap between the two, the former can easily become the latter. For example, the gentleman in front of me, when Klein looked back, he discovered that the man had fallen asleep, his body curled up on a chair. After a few minutes of silence, Klein went to pat the man awake and gave him a handful of copper pennies. "This is the payment for the interview." Okay, thank you. The man didn't realize what was happening, and when Klein reached the door, he raised his voice and said, "I'll go to a budget motel and get a bath. Get a good night's sleep, and then get a job." At noon, Klein attended a party at the Sammers. There were 10 guests. There was apple juice with steak, roast chicken, fried fish, sausage, cream soup, lots of delicacies, 2 bottles of champagne, and a bottle of red wine. On his way back from the bathroom, he met Mrs. Stellin Sammer. He thanked her sincerely. It was a sumptuous lunch. "Truly delightful. Thank you for your hospitality." It cost a total of £4 and 8 soldi. The most expensive were the 3 bottles of wine, but they were all part of Luke's collection. "He has a liquor cabinet." The pretty Mrs. Stellin smiled in response. Without waiting for Klein to speak, she said, "You earn £10 from Mary's matter alone, and if you can keep up the good fortune, you'll soon be able to have a banquet like this. For people of our class, you have to invite friends once a month and also be invited by friends." Klein, who was already used to her mannerisms, obliged politely. "Well, I'll have to wait till my income settles at £400 a year before I can be like you." Stellin immediately raised her chin slightly and tried hard to make her smile faint. £430? It must be £430. Dock area, East Lane Dock, Workers' Alliance Tavern. CO wore boots that gave her height a huge boost and stuck on a thick beard, making herself look like a short man. She tried to recall the portrait from Miss Audrey, trying to engrave in her mind the image of the man who might have been the murderer. If Gavin had been killed by him, the murderer probably frequents this tavern. CO ordered a glass of rye beer and a lunch set before huddling in a corner and eating slowly. From time to time, she would look around furtively in search of her target. After a while, the tavern's door was pushed open again, and CO reflexively looked over. With just one look, her pupils shrank so thin that they resembled needles as she nearly became petrified. The patron who entered was nearly 2 meters tall. CO has been in the bounty hunter business for a very long time. Many things were done on instinct without any thought. When she saw the patron who entered was nearly 2 meters tall, she instinctively lowered her head and continued to eat her pork sausage and French fries as if nothing had happened. Although the food emptied her mouth, CO didn't taste it at all. She endured dozens of painful seconds before she slowly raised her head and pretended to look around casually. Soon, she saw that the patron who had just entered was sitting in front of the bar counter, waiting for his booze and lunch. Soft, curly pale yellow hair, dark brown beast-like eyes, a slightly droopy mouth, an aura of solitude and malevolence. Little by little, the details came into CO's eyes, overlapping with the image in her head. It's him. It's the suspected murderer. The man who killed Williams. CO lowered her head again and slowly stuffed the rest of the food into her mouth. After a few minutes, she set the tray down on the bar, along with the glass, and left the Workers' Alliance Tavern without looking back. Due to her high boots, they effectively masked the most obvious feature of her body. Outside, CO slowed her pace and found a secluded spot to observe the people entering and exiting the tavern. After waiting for a while, she finally found an acquaintance, a technician named Burton, who lived in East Borough and worked at the East Lane Dock. The young man liked to treat himself to a cup of shoddy rye beer at noon or in the afternoon, and his salary only allowed him to afford such a beer, and he couldn't drink it every day. Xio nimbly darted over and patted Burton on the shoulder. She lowered her voice and said, "It's me, Xio." Xio. Burton looked up and down at the short man and nearly failed to recognize him as the famous Arbiter Xio, director of the streets of East Borough. "I have something to ask you." Xio pointed to a nearby corner. Burton followed in puzzlement, only to come to a realization when he arrived in a secluded corner. "Are you doing a bounty mission?" He had heard that Xio was also a bounty hunter. Yes. Xio nodded perfunctorily, fished out 5 pennies, and tossed them around. "Do you know that tall man at the tavern?" "You mean the one that's this tall, has pale yellow hair, and wears a fierce look?" Burton gestured. "Yes." Xio took out the folded portrait and unfolded it. "You have to be sure." "That's him. He's been coming to this tavern often for the past 2 to 3 months. I've never seen him before that. He's very fierce, completely unreasonable, and he's good at fighting. It's best that you don't provoke him." Burton glanced at the portrait carefully and gave some sincere advice. "Yeah, when I saw that person just now, it was just like my encounter with a ferocious beast when I was young. I felt that I was in danger and wasn't a match for him, so I had to immediately avoid him." Xio secretly exhaled and asked, "Do you know anyone he's in close contact with?" "No idea. He's not very sociable and he seldom speaks. We don't even know what his name is. We have given him a nickname, Giant." Burton curled his lips and shook his head. Xio thought for a while before asking again, "Where else have you met him, besides the tavern?" "You can ask your friends the same question. Remember, it has to be a trusted friend." Burton recalled and said, "When I went to the Dock Union to do some work, the East Lane Docks Dock Union, I would occasionally see him appear there." "Xio, why aren't you a member of the union?" "You're so just, and those guys not only charge us 1.5 soldi a week, but when the other docks go on strike, they'll pay us half our salary just because we have to support our families. Lord, let's just forget about it. In order to live a good life, we must help each other. However, once they organize a strike, they'll come to an agreement with the lawyers sent by those rich people. Our situation doesn't improve at all." Stop. Xio lowered her right palm and said, "Apart from that, have you seen Giant anywhere else?" "No, my friends probably haven't either. After all, we often discuss him in private," Burton answered in a firm tone. Xio didn't say anything more and gave him 5 copper pennies. "Drinks on me. Don't tell anyone about what I just asked. It'll be very dangerous." Before she finished her sentence, she had already turned around the corner and headed towards the Dock Union located at East Lane Dock. About 10 minutes later, Xio saw the 2-story yellow building. She wore her canvas coat inverted and exposed the patches beneath, instantly transforming herself from a short worker to a vagabond. Xio looked at the homeless people huddled around the corner, pinched her nose, and went over to sit down beside them. She glanced at the Dock Union on the opposite side of the street, where people were coming in and out. As the minutes passed, Xio endured the cold and the harsh environment while tenaciously observing the situation around the Dock Union and the surrounding area. She clearly remembered Williams's insistence on drinking, and she also remembered how she felt when she saw the newspaper that fateful day. These feelings made her even more patient than usual. At that moment, about 8 people came out of the Dock Union, and they headed for the cafe across the street to have lunch in groups. Xio narrowed her eyes and carefully scanned every passerby to confirm their appearance. "There's no one suspicious." Xio was about to look away and wait for the next batch of people when the door to the coffee shop creaked and was pulled open as the heat from within rushed out. A man couldn't help but take off his gold-rimmed glasses and wipe away the fog with his sleeves. Xio gave him a casual glance, and her gaze suddenly froze. Those eyes. That mouth. It always had that taunting smile. "Lanivas." Xio jerked her head back, not daring to look again. The man from before had bronze skin and short hair, and his face was craggy. He was very different from the portraits, except that his eyes and mouth gave her a familiar feeling. It was the feeling of taunting everyone. "Is it Lanivas? Can it be Lanivas?" Xio bowed her head and stared at the flagstones on the street. At the Sammers. After a sumptuous lunch, the hosts and guests gathered in the activity room to chat, and they agreed to play Texas together. Interesting rumors and humorous stories echoed intermittently as Klein maintained his smile, interjecting from time to time. He also saw the Sammer family's 2 children entering and exiting energetically. And next to him, Judge N. Cooper wore his usual serious expression, occasionally providing legal advice for the discussion. Klein smiled, turned his body slightly, and asked in a low voice, "Are you bored?" "No, their topics are very interesting." Judge N. nodded seriously. Klein was stunned and blurted a question, "Then why don't you laugh?" Judge N. frowned slightly and looked at him in puzzlement. "Why are you smiling?" Klein's mouth twitched, not knowing how to respond. He was about to make a joke about how much Judge N. was like his cat Brody, forever so serious, when suddenly he heard a series of ethereal pleas. "Female Miss Justice has found useful information, so quickly, based on the clue I gave her." Klein stood up and slightly bowed. "I need to use the bathroom." In the bathroom, Klein locked the door, took 4 steps counterclockwise, and went above the grey fog. His judgment was very accurate, as the plea came from Miss Justice. Klein suddenly felt nervous as he emanated his spirituality in anticipation and seriousness to listen to her words. After the usual honourable name, Justice recounted truthfully, they discovered the clue you provided at the Workers' Alliance Tavern in the Pier District's East Lane dock. The person's nickname is Giant. After tailing the Giant and figuring his in and outs, they discovered a person suspected to be Lanivas at the East Lane dock's dock union. Temporarily, they don't dare to approach Lanivas because Giant is very powerful and dangerous. They can only continue waiting for an opportunity. In the meantime, they've also asked if they could notify the police and collect the bounty after confirming that it's Lanivas. Lanivas is a very powerful and dangerous helper. Does he have any other helpers? Is there a faction backing him? Why did he kill so many people? What was he planning to do by being in the dock union? A series of questions flashed through Klein's mind, making him feel that things were much more complicated than he had expected. As for the last request, his answer was undoubtedly yes. He would even suggest to the other party that they should inform the Church of the Evernight Goddess directly because there was a possibility of the police leaking the information. Getting them talks of the Church of the Goddess to kill Lanivas is also a form of revenge. Klein silently murmured to himself. He had a strong urge to immediately confirm that the man was Lanivas, lest things changed because he waited too long. He took a deep breath, suppressed his emotions, and undid the spirit pendulum around his wrist on his sleeve. There is danger going to the dock union for confirmation. Closing his eyes and chanting 7 times, Klein opened his eyes and looked at the topaz pendant. He discovered that it was motionless, completely still. The divination failed. Klein immediately frowned. He changed the sentence he used, changed the divination method, but they all resulted in a failure. After some careful thought, he thought of 3 reasons. First, there wasn't enough information to make a divination. Second, Lanivas wasn't at the dock union, making it difficult for the divination to succeed. And, third, Lanivas was just like Zangwill, who had items that could shield against divination. An item to shield against divination, a benefit he obtained from that god-spawn ritual. A little godhood of the true creator. Klein thought for a few seconds, then decided that no matter what, he had to make a trip to the dock union. There were certain things that needed to be done even though danger was a certainty. If the 2 ladies were able to observe secretly without being seen, so can I only need to meet with Lanivas once and I can confirm it with divination. Of course, I can't be rash, I have to prepare in advance. For example, I have to send the old black eye above the grey fog and not carry it with me. That's to prevent the spiritual corruption of the true creator from resonating with his godhood. Another example, I should elevate my height so that the Giant wouldn't be able to recognize me as the passerby from last night from my figure. For example, I should find a suitable and sufficient reason to not arouse suspicion. Yes, I can pretend to be a reporter and head there for an interview. I'll visit Mike Joseph later and borrow his false reporter identification. The corner of Klein's mouth slowly curled up as he blanketed his body with his spirituality before descending back into the real world. 3 in the afternoon at the dock union in East Lane dock. Klein wore a thick sweater, a tan jacket, and a simple cap that brought him closer to the usual investigative reporters in style rather than the ones who attended banquets and interviewed people of status from time to time. Such a costume had cost him an extra £1.10 solly. At that moment, he was wearing gold-rimmed glasses, and his hair was neatly combed back, gleaming with the luster of hair oil. His face no longer had a messy beard, so he could only plaster a deep black stubble around his lips. His height was at least 5 centimeters taller than before. He was trying his best to look different from the worker from last night, making it impossible for anyone who wasn't particularly familiar with him to make any associations. In the pockets of his clothes and trousers, there was no old black eye, no charms or herbal essential oils. There was only a deck of tarot cards, a stack of notes, a fountain pen, a wallet, some change, a bunch of keys, and false reporter identification documents. He didn't know the Lanivas's current condition, nor did he know where the powerful beyond lingering around him came from. Hence, out of precaution, he didn't bring any suspicious items. Looking at the 2-story building ahead of him, Klein crossed the street, pretending to not rely on the clown's intuition to notice that several pairs of eyes were watching him. He pushed open the door and saw that the dock union's layout was rather simple. There were no female receptionists or spacious lobbies. The stairs to the 2nd floor were in the middle, flanked by office corridors, and the floors weren't lined with wooden planks, much less carpet. They were paved purely out of cement. Klein turned his head to look at the man guarding by the door as he went over and said, "I'm a reporter from the Backland Daily Tribune. I would like to interview the workers of your association and get to know your needs and desires." The man was wearing a very patched jacket, which even had dirty cotton lining exposed in the linen shirt underneath. After hearing the word reporter, he suddenly became vigilant and replied loudly, "No, we haven't organized a strike lately, no. I think you've misunderstood me. I'm someone who sympathizes with you. I'm planning on doing a special report on what the union does to help the workers and the actual difficulties they encountered." Trust me, with the help of his clown beyond the powers, Klein made his eyes look abnormally sincere. "Is that so? Go to Mr. Rand, our committee member in charge of publicity. Turn right, and it's the 2nd office on the right." The man hesitated for a few seconds before replying. "Thank you." Klein bowed with faint relief, and he felt the gaze observing him from a dark corner of the room vanish. He turned to his right and, with his back perspiring in cold sweat, knocked on the office door. The door creaked open. The middle-aged man with sparse hair looked at him and asked, "May I know who you are?" "Mr. Rand, I'm reporter Statham from the Backland Daily Tribune. This is my reporter identification documents. I'd like to make a report with unions as the theme to help you acquire more attention. Klein almost believed he was a journalist. That's me. The middle-aged man looked at the reporter's identification documents and said hesitatingly, clearly unwillingly, "It's hard for me to believe that you reporters are here to help us. I was born in East Borough, and I know how miserable the lives of the workers are. If you don't believe me, you can follow me the entire time and monitor my every question." Klein suddenly smiled and added, "A report with actual interview data would be better than nothing. Far better than news that's written purely based on imagination. At least you can provide your views and hopefully guide things in the direction you want." Rand touched his scalp and replied hesitantly, "All right then. I'll follow you the entire time." "Thank you." Klein almost lost control of his emotions. Afterward, under Rand's guidance, he entered one office after another, interviewing the members of the Workers' Association according to his prepared questions. Right corridor, nothing. Left corridor, nothing. Klein calmly went up the wooden stairs to the second floor. This time, Rand led him into the office directly opposite the staircase and introduced the people inside. "This is a reporter from the Backland Daily Tribune, Mr. Statham. He wants to interview the lot of you, but I have to remind you that there are some questions which you have the right to refuse to answer." Klein smiled, took 2 steps forward, and made a gesture to shake hands with each and every staff member in the room. At that moment, he saw a slightly familiar figure. Although the man's skin had turned bronze, his ordinary round face had become angular, and his glasses had changed from a round frame to a gold-rimmed frame. Klein still found a trace of familiarity from his spirituality as a seer. Immediately afterward, his body trembled, and the smile on his face almost went out of control. "I'm sorry, I suddenly have a stomachache." "May I ask where the washroom is?" Klein asked with an awkward smile, holding his stomach with the hand that didn't hold a pen and paper. Rand and the staff didn't suspect anything. They all pointed to the door and said, "Go out, turn left. When you reach the end, you'll see the sign." Klein smiled apologetically and walked out of the room, heading quickly for the washroom. Inside, he selected the cubicle closest to the window, sat on the toilet, and locked the wooden door behind him. He bent down, the corners of his mouth curving into a silent laugh. He laughed so hard he nearly couldn't keep his body straight. A drop of sparkling liquid fell onto the ground from his laughter. Klein had confirmed that it was Lanuvas. This wasn't because of that small sense of familiarity, but because he felt another type of aura from the other party's body, one that left an extremely deep impression on him. This was also the main reason why he had nearly lost control on the spot. The trembling of his body originated from his instinctive fear. The collapse of his emotions came from the horror and sorrow deep within his memories. That was the aura of the true creator. Klein washed his face and went on with the interview as if nothing had happened. Even while facing Lanivas, who had somehow changed so much, he continued to ask questions and record the answers. After finishing all of this, he bade farewell to the Workers' Association and walked out of the dimly lit building. Outside, the sky was cloudy and misty, as if the evening had come early. The true creator's aura can only come from his body or spawn, as well as things that extend from the two. For example, items bestowed by him, or his godhood. This corroborates with what Lanivas said to Eugene. In addition, there's a tinge of familiarity. I didn't even need to go above the grey fog for divination to confirm that it's him if it wasn't for me having already interacted with the true creator a few times and coming close to his mental corruption. There's no way I could have recognized the aura to be his, which didn't contain any strength, and of his nature Klein felt heavy emotions, but he appeared very relaxed. He stood on the street and purposely organized the interview notes. In the process, he caught a glimpse of a slightly familiar figure among the vagabonds across him. Miss Xio, Klein instantly made a guess with what he knew. He didn't stop, and he put away the notes before walking towards the tracked public carriage station. At this moment, a horse carriage suddenly stopped in front of him. We meet again. Sitting in the carriage was a thin, elegant, middle-aged gentleman with white hair at his temples. He was the great detective who was helping the police investigation, Isengard Stanton. As for Klein, he didn't look any different than usual. He was just a little taller and had changed into a new set of clothes. What a coincidence, I was just thinking about the last time I interviewed you, Klein answered deliberately. Isengard suddenly understood and changed the subject with a smile. I'm here to investigate the case. The death of Saba has been eliminated and I'm in charge of it. Her death is very close to East Lane Dock. So it's indeed a copycat crime, Klein feigned ignorance. After exchanging a few pleasantries, he got into the tracked public carriage. Instead of going straight home, he made a transfer and headed to the Quirag Club in Hillston. In the club's lounge, he quickly went above the grey fog to confirm that no one was following him. Only at this step did Klein completely relax and feel some lingering fear. The aura of the true creator lingered in his mind like a nightmare, leaving the clothes on his back moist after they repeatedly dried. To be sure, Klein conjured a yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and a dark red fountain pen before writing a divination statement he had already long thought of. The source of the inexplicable familiarity earlier. Putting down his fountain pen and leaning back into his chair, he began to mumble as he entered the dream. In that grey and illusory world, he saw a figure. This figure had ordinary facial features. He wore round glasses, and he had a condescending and taunting smile from beginning to end. He was none other than Lanuvas. I finally found you, Klein no longer used his clown ability to control his facial expressions as he muttered to himself through clenched teeth. Then, he sat up straight and prepared to answer Miss Justice's prayer. Klein controlled his emotions and said in a deep but cold voice, "There's no need for confirmation. That is Lanivas. You can inform the Church of the Evernight Goddess and tell them that Lanivas is the godhood of the fallen creator." Audrey, who was watching her father train the hunting hounds with Susie, froze when she heard Mr. Fool's response. Fallen creator, isn't that the true creator? That swindler actually has the godhood of the true creator. Such a simple mission actually involves the godhood of the true creator. As expected, I knew Mr. Fool had other deeper motives. He was targeting the true creator. As expected of Mr. Fool, many thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind. Audrey, who had set up an urgent communication method with CO and Force, quickly passed on Mr. Fool's message to the two ladies through the huge golden retriever, Susie, claiming that the information she had received came via other sources. In the corner of an old church, as CO was thinking about how to confirm Lanivas's identity, or how she should create chaos and avenge Williams, she unfolded the board of paper. There's no need to confirm. He's Lanivas. CO's eyes widened as she quickly skimmed through the rest of the paper's content. The piece of paper clearly wrote, "The only choice is to notify the Church of the Evernight Goddess. Alert them that Lanivas is the godhood of the true creator on him." Godhood? The true creator's godhood? CO blurted out as she looked at the golden retriever in front of her in shock, only to realize that she was equally dumbfounded. What? Force was listening when she suddenly felt something was amiss. She hurriedly reached out for the piece of paper and scanned it. After a moment, she curled her lips and said at a loss, This must be a joke, right? How did we get involved in a matter that's tied to an evil god's godhood? This was meant to involve the capture of a cunning swindler worth only £200. In response to Force's question, Susie could only express the notion that she was only a dog and that she didn't know what was happening either with her innocent eyes. Not expecting a dog to answer her questions, she turned her head to Psio and said, I'm afraid Miss Audrey isn't as naive and innocent as we thought. She has many secrets. This might be a power struggle between the cult, the nobles and the church. However, it's evident that she didn't know about the matter of godhood prior to this. She's also being used by someone. Whom that person could be her father, Count Hall. What's fortunate is that this matter ends here. You don't need to take the risk anymore. After you get someone to make the report, you just need to wait to collect the bounty in peace. Psio was startled and said, That's true. Hopefully, those networks are able to avenge Williams. They're so strong, so they'll definitely be able to do it. Definitely. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly turned her head to the side and spoke as if she was talking to herself. I'm still too weak. Too weak. Psio jerked her hand up, covering her mouth and nose. I'm still too weak. If not for that, I would have chosen to take revenge myself, but right now I can only take a step back, not to mention there's Giant and those hidden helpers around Lanivas. With just his godhood, he isn't someone I can deal with the reaction speed of the networks. They'll likely take action tonight once they receive the report. The Backland Diocese is second only to the church's headquarters. They have many sealed artifacts and many powerful beyonders. There's no need to wait for any additional helpers. After completing his task of informing Audrey, Klein returned to the real world. He stuck on a beard, changed his hairstyle, and stared into the mirror for several minutes. He felt anticipation and excitement, as well as depression and a sense of powerlessness. Before the evening arrived, he left the Quiet Club and returned to Minsk Street. On his way, he went to the grocery market and found a store that was bustling with its great business. He bought several masks, including a clown's. He had decided to watch the hunt for Lanivas tonight. He wanted to see the other party pay the price for his madness with his own eyes. Of course, with his strength, he could only watch from a distance and not even have the right to approach them. By 11 o'clock, when many people were in their dreams, Klein changed into his greyish-blue worker's uniform and disguised himself as he had the night before. Then, he put on his cap, walked a few streets away, and took a rental carriage to the Backland Bridge area. Once there, he switched to walking and walked all the way to the East Berlin dock. His interview yesterday included questions such as where are you staying now and how's the environment like. Therefore, he knew very well that Lanivas would be staying in the dormitory provided by the dock union at night. However, Klein didn't go near it. Instead, he carefully went around it. His target was the clock tower of the East Berlin dock. In Backland, in addition to the large church with its tall, iconic clock tower, many government buildings were also equipped with one. However, they weren't necessarily tall, grand, and not ornate. It was mostly built for pragmatic reasons, such as this one in the East Berlin dock. Compared to the surrounding buildings that reached a maximum of 3 stories, it was like a giant that stood high in the night sky as it overlooked the entire area. Klein easily entered the interior of the clock tower and went up the endless flight of spiral stairs as he moved quickly in the darkness. Finally, he arrived at his destination. He arrived at the top of the gigantic wall clock. It was surrounded by a dark yellow fence, and at the top of his head was a steeple that could be reached by stretching his hand. Taking a few steps forward, Klein hid in the shadows, got a sense of his bearings, and looked towards the dock union's dormitory. It was a 2-story, brick-red building, and the occasional pedestrian resembled a black dot in Klein's eyes. He stared for a few seconds, then took a step back, and sank into the darkness. At the same time, he took out his newly bought mask and wore it. It was a clown with the corner of its mouth sharply raised and the painted red nose. A happy clown. Wearing a clown mask, Klein stood in the rich darkness, patiently waiting for the predetermined show. He waited for 2 hours. When the hands of the large wall clock passed 1 o'clock, he suddenly saw something flying from the distance. It was a huge airship covered in dark black paint. If it weren't for the faint moonlight, it would have been indistinguishable from the night sky. Unlike what was described in the newspapers and magazines, depicting them as machines that emitted exaggerated mechanical noises, its doors rotated quietly. As silent as a vulture who had found its prey but hadn't found a chance. The solid, light alloy supported the cotton frame, and below it hung the compartment for guns, projectile launchers, and cannons. At a glance, it appeared to be a powerful deterrent. It's silent. Is this a temporary result caused by beyond the means? Klein, wearing his clown mask, looked at the slowly descending airship and made a guess. At this moment, he was most puzzled over the dispatch of an airship for a small scale beyond the battle in a densely populated area of the city. Aren't they afraid of dealing collateral damage to the surrounding citizens? Aren't they afraid of causing panic? Very soon, the airship hovered about 10 meters in the air. This way, Klein was even less worried about being discovered. His position was much higher than them. Observing the situation below, he suddenly had a hunch. It was likely that the airship wouldn't engage in combat, but rather provide air surveillance of the area to give the personnel involved in the operation a better view and prevent the target from escaping if any accidents occurred. Right at this moment, 3 figures dressed in black robes suddenly appeared in front of the 2-story brick red building. The man in the lead didn't wear a hat, revealing his short golden brown hair and blackish green eyes which appeared to be as deep as a windless lake. The collars of his shirt and windbreaker were propped up high, and his palms were covered with a layer of gloves that were as red as blood. A silver-white metal suitcase was wound around his left hand via a chain of the same color. This was one of the 9 high-ranking deacons of the Church of the Evernight Goddess, Krestet Sisamir. He was also one of the 3 powerhouses of the Red Gloves, and he happened to be in Bagland. After looking straight ahead, Sisamir turned his head to the left and said to his subordinate, "You sealed artifact 1-63. Yes, Your Grace. The Netor crouched down and helped Sisamir untie the chain around the silver suitcase. Throughout the entire process, Krestet Sisamir's muscles were very tense, as though he was fighting something. The Netor on the left took a deep breath and pressed down suddenly, causing the illusionary ripples on the surface of the silver box to crack. The surrounding halo suddenly disappeared as if it was completely sucked into the case. A bone sword, that was less than a meter long, emitted glossy, pure white light as it slowly floated up. Its blade had an ancient silver-coated mirror attached to it. The scenes reflected in the mirror were layered and superimposed without end. The Netor on the left took the mirror and pointed it at the brick red building. The building was clearly reflected in it, and nothing seemed to change. However, Sisamir slowly exhaled, stretched out his left hand to grasp the short bone sword. The surrounding halo was somewhat restored. "Let's go in." He started walking towards the entrance of the brick building. The 3 Netorks opened the door and entered the dark building and targeted the stairs that led to the 2nd floor. At that moment, a tall, thin figure emerged from the shadows in the corner. He wore a black priest's uniform, and he had curly, pale yellow hair and beastly dark brown eyes. "You're the goddess's sword," the nearly 2-meter-tall giant spoke in a deep voice. At the same time, he clenched his right palm. Bang, bang, bang. The Union members in this small brick red building exploded one after another in their dreams, without even having the chance to scream. Their bodies split into pieces, turning into thick, sticky flesh. Half of their bodies rushed towards the giant to weave into cloaks that could reduce magical damage. The other half condensed into furry giant rugs that blanketed the 3 Netorks. Krestet Sisamir only watched silently without doing anything. Silently, the flesh and blood dissipated and collapsed before falling down like rain, but the raindrops didn't stain the floor red. In each of the rooms, figures emerged once more, still sleeping soundly. This is the world within a mirror world that only targets beyonders. The flesh bombs you planted in the bodies of the ordinary people are only illusions in here. Sisamir raised the holy artifact bone sword in his right hand, causing the light around him to disappear. HMPH, the giant suddenly grabbed his left shoulder with his right hand and tore off his arm. He then threw the blood arm forward. Boom! His arm exploded like a bomb, turning into a rain of blood that rained down on the 3 Netorks. At the same time, the flesh on his left shoulder began to squirm madly as he slowly grew a new arm which was still bloody without any skin. Smack, smack, smack. Sizzle. The blood-colored raindrops accurately avoided Sisamir and the others before falling to the ground and quickly rolling into deep, dark traces. But no matter how hard they tried, they always missed the 3 Netorks by a hair's breadth, as if they were fated to do so. My enemies aren't always lucky enough. The corners of Sisamir's mouth curled up, and with a slip of his foot, he instantly appeared in front of Giant. Giant's eyes narrowed as his body suddenly melted like a candle, turning into sticky flesh and blood that quickly seeped into the floor. Sisamir immediately kneeled and plunged the holy artifact bone sword into the ground. No. In the rich darkness, a roar filled with pain and horror instantly sounded, and it was immediately swallowed up by tranquility and serenity. Sisamir stood up and drew out the bone sword. A drop of dark red blood was slowly dripping down its tip, and on the floor, flesh and blood were seeping out, congealing into a face of despair. It was precisely the giant who had a slightly drooping mouth. Bat, bat, bat. 3 shadows appeared around Sisamir in succession. However, they all mysteriously collapsed to the ground, having been forcefully taken down by many invisible entities. Bang, 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 another network fired, and the silver surface of the bullet seemed to bear the Evernight sacred emblem. The 3 attackers hiding in the shadows suddenly revealed themselves, twitching as they lost their breath. Rose Bishop, shadow ascetic people from the Aurora Order. Sisamir frowned and said in a low voice without turning to his companions, "There's something wrong about this. It's very strange. All of you be careful." Before he could finish his words, he heard the shuffling of footsteps which echoed in the silence and serenity. Immediately, he saw Lanivas with his chiseled face dressed in a linen shirt walking down the dark staircase. He appeared calm and placid without any signs of fear. "I'm very curious. To the Aurora Order, you should be a blasphemer. Why would they send people to protect you?" Sisamir didn't seem to notice the abnormality as he asked casually. Lanivas showed his trademark taunting smile and said, "That's simple. Because I'm no longer just Lanivas." He paused for a moment, and his gaze suddenly turned cold. "Now, I'm even more of the true creator." He yanked open his linen shirt, revealing the dark red flesh of his skinless chest and abdomen. The flesh and blood were conjoined together, forming the figure of a hanged man. All of a sudden, the void around them shattered like glass, and all the scenes around them crumbled. This was the aura of a deity. In the clock tower of East Balane Dock, Klein hid in the darkness while donning a clown mask as he quietly stared at the dormitory of the Dock Union. An airship floated above. He couldn't see the details of the battle, and he had no way of knowing the developments of the operation in the red brick building. All he could do was endure and determine the situation by observing the changes in the surroundings and the occasional black dot that passed by. Just then, he saw all the gas lamps in the area extinguish. All of them had been extinguished. It was pitch black there. Right on the heels of that, a feeling that left an extremely deep impression on him exploded from the small red brick building. Even from a long distance away, Klein couldn't help but tremble all over. His legs went soft, and he bent his waist. It was the feeling of being looked down upon, a feeling that repressed one's spirit. It was a feeling that was impossible to resist or face. No, don't look directly at God and his adrift thoughts. Klein seemed to recall the time when he was in the horde of the Blackthorn Security Company. It was like when he was about to activate his spirit vision to probe the mental state of Megos and the baby in her womb. That feeling was exactly the same as it was now. No, it's even more extreme and terrifying right now. How could this be? Wasn't Lanivas just bestowed with a little bit of the true creator's godhood? At most, he would be given 1 or 2 other corresponding items. Why does it feel like an evil god is about to descend? Before Klein could shake off the trembling of his body and the numbing of his thoughts, he suddenly felt a deep, serene, and profound darkness engulfing the feeling that couldn't be looked at, probed, or resisted. The 2 sensations were obliterated at the same time, causing the gas lamps in the surrounding area to light up once again. The airship, which couldn't stop itself from plummeting, floated back up again. Everything seemed to return to its original state, without the slightest change. But Klein didn't believe that everything was over. He stood up with all his might, knowing that something important had happened in the red brick building. The feeling that exceeds the beyonder, at a fundamental level, is no longer there, nor is there the feeling of the descent of an evil god. This means that the true creator or Lanivas's plot has failed. However, the Nitorks must have suffered some sort of serious blow as well. They might not even have much strength left at that moment. Klein's heart stirred. He quickly took out the spirit pendulum inside his left sleeve, holding it with one hand as he said in a low voice, "Lanivas is no longer dangerous at the moment." After quickly repeating it 7 times, he opened his eyes and saw that the topaz pendant was rotating counterclockwise. However, its frequency wasn't fast, and its amplitude wasn't large. This showed that Lanivas was still a dangerous man, but to a lesser degree. What caught Klein's attention was something else. The divination hadn't failed again. This meant that Lanivas had been separated from the godhood bestowed upon him by the true creator. A cold wind blew, seeping deep into Klein's bones, causing him to shiver. He felt as if an electric current had instantly drilled into his brain from the soles of his feet. Maybe I can do something. He suddenly had this thought and no longer hesitated. He took 4 steps counterclockwise in the dark clock tower and went above the grey fog. Without wasting any time, he sat down and conjured a piece of yellowish-brown goatskin parchment and wrote the divination statement. Lanivas's escape route. Klein leaned back, quickly chanted the statement, and entered a deep dream. In that illusory, separated, misty world, he saw the slush-filled sewers with their dark, dirty tunnels and rusty metal pipes. It was cramped and sealed. It's the sewers. Klein immediately woke up, enveloped his body with spirituality, and descended into the grey fog. As soon as he returned to the real world, he took a few steps back and came to the side of the clock tower that faced away from the airship. Klein didn't walk down the spiral stairs, but instead somersaulted over the dark yellow fence. With the help of the platform, the bulging spots, and the decorations on the surface of the building, he jumped down level by level. His body was so balanced it was as though he was walking on the ground. In a very short period of time, his feet stepped on the thick flagstones on the street. Inside the small red brick building, 2 Nitorks wearing red gloves had collapsed by the door unconscious. The ancient silver-plated mirror had rolled to a corner, but it was no longer special. It no longer looked anything like a Grade 1 sealed artifact. However, one could clearly feel that it was recovering bit by bit. Krestet Sisamir was kneeling at an intersection, a stream of tear-like blood streaked down the corners of his eyes. His short, golden brown hair hung limply, and his standing collars on his windbreaker and shirt were in tatters, revealing his relatively sharp chin and his thin, stiff mouth. Gasping for air, a distorted, semi-illusory, and translucent face appeared on each of his teeth. Sisamir braced himself with his left red-gloved hand on the ground. With difficulty, he straightened his neck and looked straight ahead. Directly in front of him was the staircase to the second floor, above which stood Lanivas, who had his linen shirt completely unbuttoned. Lanivas stood very straight, with the pure white, smooth-boned sword stuck in his chest. The skinless flesh no longer formed the outline of the hanging man's figure, leaving behind a void. Vaguely, one could even see his back through the hole in Lanivas's body. Lanivas moved with great difficulty before suddenly laughing loudly. He said with a maniacal laugh, "Ha ha, ha ha, thank you. I really need to thank you. For real, look at my sincere eyes. I really want to thank you. If you hadn't discovered me and arrived in time, I would truly become the vessel of the true Creator when he descends in a few months. When that happens, how different would it be from dying?" Sisamir was stunned when he heard that. He refused to believe that the person who had his crutch destroyed thanks to his hard work would be so happy. At that moment, he wished to stand, but he couldn't. He was also powerless to resist. When Lanivas saw his confusion, he coughed and said with a smile, "Do you know? To people like me, it's the most miserable thing when there's no one to share a great accomplishment that I'm proud of. Cough, when I was in Tingen City, I was deceived by the true Creator who not only initiated the descent of his spawn, but he also secretly planted a sapling in my body. No, I even believe that Megos's child was just his ruse. He didn't even get the members of the Aurora Order to protect her to divert attention. It was as though he knew from the beginning that the ploy would end in failure. His true descent was set up inside me. The godhood he bestowed upon me suddenly combined with the sapling in my body after I reached Backland. Ha ha, can you imagine that? I was being replaced bit by bit by him. In the end, I would become the true Creator. Before I came up with a solution, I was found by the members of the Aurora Order through the godhood. Thankfully, they're all lunatics with simple brains. Ha ha, there are always so many fools. Cough, cough, cough. Lanivas spat out a mouthful of foul blood, seemingly recovering some of his mobility. He took a difficult step forward, and his chiseled face suddenly turned soft for some unknown reason as he began resembling his original self. Lanivas reached out to the staircase's handrail and laughed tauntingly. Thankfully, if the true Creator wishes to fully descend and completely replace me, he'll need large amounts of pessimism, despair, numbness, resentment and primitive evil. Only Backland, only East Borough, the factory and dock area, could satisfy his requirements. This gave me a chance to interact with others. I knew that it was unrealistic to report this to the police simply through the people I interacted with because the people I come in contact could very well be members of the Aurora Order. I initially wanted to instigate a strike to get the police to notice me, but I was warned by someone from the Aurora Order. After being tortured, I could only hastily end it. I acted as though I was on the brink of losing control and had gained the opportunity to head into the sewers to vent. During this process, I secretly used my blood to corrupt the creatures living in there, turning them into terrifying mutated monsters. Unfortunately, before you could fully investigate the reason behind it, it was discovered by the Aurora Order. Apparently, a member of theirs died under a mutated monster. Sigh, now that I no longer have the godhood or the sapling, my blood no longer has such effects. After that, I was controlled even more strictly, but I still found an opportunity. I killed a prostitute and used the cruelest method to attract the attention of the police. But who would have thought that the people of the Aurora Order would disguise the case as part of a series of serial murders? I still failed to receive the rescue I needed. Out of similar opportunities, I could only use a more ingenious method. I took the initiative to request for the fiercest, craziest, most radical member of the Aurora Order to watch me, and this suited their thoughts. Hair, can't they use their brains? Such a lunatic would get into trouble at any moment. As expected, you guys came. Phew, at that moment, Lanivas exhaled and began to move his body, as if he had finally gotten rid of the remnant effects. He pulled out the holy bone sword from his chest and said regretfully, "What a pity. I can't take it with me, otherwise I would be quickly tracked and found by you." After the pure white bone sword completely separated from his body, not a single drop of blood remained from the exaggerated wound. The part that had disappeared didn't seem to belong to Lanivas. Lanivas pressed his right hand against his chest, bowing as he faced Krestet Sisamir and company. The people on the airship outside should be recovering soon. I can't stay any longer. Thank you very much. Although you're all very stupid, you still ultimately helped me. It's an honor for foolish bastards like yourselves. Having said this, he straightened his body and smiled tauntingly. Goodbye, foolish nitwalks. Use your lives to send me off. Grasping the bone sword in his hand, he abruptly took a few steps forward, attempting to stab at Krestet Sisamir. But at that moment, his eyelids began to grow heavy, as he felt like collapsing into a slumber. So you still have some strength. This is troublesome. Lanivas bit his tongue gently and suddenly threw the holy bone sword at the unconscious Nitork by the door. No, Sisamir waved his hand with the strength he accumulated through painstaking means, causing an invisible entity to divert the holy bone sword. Lanivas seized that opportunity and dashed to the side. He somersaulted out the red brick building through the window of the washroom at the end of the corridor. Soon after, he opened a manhole cover along the streets and quickly climbed into the sewers. Lanivas seemed to be very familiar with this place. Even though it was dark, he could still run, jump, and turn, quickly fleeing deep into the maze of sewers. Suddenly, he instinctively stopped and leaned back. Oof. A card had stabbed deep into his right chest, and blood began dripping profusely from its edge. Lanivas looked up, and with his ability to see in the dark, he saw his attacker. It was a medium-sized man in a worker's uniform, wearing a mask with a raised mouth and red nose. It was a happy clown. The moment their eyes met, Lanivas suddenly ducked and rolled forward. Clang. A tarot card, with an angel and trumpet, shot out sharply like a dagger, embedding itself into the wall of the sewer. And its position was at the same height as Lanivas's neck just moments before. Clang, clang, clang. Lanivas either rolled, jumped to his side, or threw himself forward, nimbly avoiding the three cards that came in succession with abnormal agility. Their collision with the walls, slabs, and concrete echoed like metal striking a wall. Meanwhile, out of the corner of his eye, he saw that the man in the clown mask was following him closely, not much slower than he was. In his hand was a thick stack of cards as he launched them with great familiarity and skill. On the surface of an approaching card was a sun with 5 facial features. With his left hand, Lanivas propped himself up against the wall and leaped into the air, drastically changing his course. At that moment, he heard a swishing sound before suddenly feeling a sharp pain at his ankle. He launched 2 cards. One arrived slightly late and was aimed in the direction I was escaping in. Can he foresee my movements? The moment he landed on the ground, Lanivas endured the pain and rolled once again. Clang. Another tarot card embedded itself into his original position, resonating constantly in response to the impact. It was only then that Lanivas noticed a card deeply embedded in his right ankle. The card depicting stars, water containers, and holy water stained in red. Two. Lanivas didn't even have the luxury of time to think or treat his injuries. One after another, the cards turned into seemingly sharp flying daggers, shooting at different parts of his body. Very soon, the injuries on his right leg and chest, and the remnant effects from the hole in his chest, as well as the prior demigod-level clash caused this sequence 9 marauder to turn sluggish. This was in contrast to the nimbleness and speed that marauders were known for. POW. He sent a card flying, but a deep laceration tore through his wrist, one that kept bleeding profusely. The Nitox and the military will be coming soon. I can't delay any longer. At this moment, Lanivas's mind was very clear. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and stopped dodging, allowing a card depicting the devil to strike him squarely in the neck. In almost an instant, the cards sticking out from his body were sent flying. The hideous wounds on his neck, right chest, wrist, and ankle were all squirming madly, sprouting one meat tendril after another in disgusting shapes. On his skin, numerous small gauzy bumps appeared. These gauzy bumps had a metallic tint to them as if they had turned into a set of armor. Clang. A tarot card was shot over, but it was deflected by the fine gauzy bumps. With bloodshot eyes, Lanivas stared at the clown who had put away his cards after coming to a halt. He said, half laughing and half mocking, no matter what, after being tormented by a deity, one will always get something in return. Before he could finish his words, he had already jumped over the polluted waters in the canal with his left foot, throwing himself at the enemy opposite him. As if expecting this, Klein stepped to the side, pulled his left hand out of his pocket, clenched it into a fist, and threw it at Lanivas's temple. Bam. Lanivas swung his elbow sideways and raised his forearm, accurately hitting his opponent's fist. The explosive force surged like a torrential tide, causing Klein's body to move from the impact as he staggered a little. Pa, pa, pa. Crisp explosive blast sounded in Klein's ear. Punches, each heavier and faster than the last, constantly reflected into his eyes. The flurry of attacks made him seem to forget to maintain his balance. He staggered and fell to the side, then, with the support of his left elbow, he rolled in a different direction. Smack, 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 bang, bang, bang. Lanivas's punches and kicks came quickly and furiously, almost hitting Klein quite a few times, but thanks to his exaggerated balance and movements that defied common sense, he managed to dodge successfully. At times, he would be on the wall and at other times, on the ground. It was as though he was performing an acrobatic act. He appeared very calm without the slightest bit of impatience. It was as though he had decided to drag out the battle as long as possible until the Nitox and the military arrived. And once there were any signs of Lanivas's attempting to escape, he was hell-bent on pestering him and not give him an opportunity to do so. Pa. Lanivas's punch forced Klein to use the rebound from the wall to fly back into the air, and as for himself, he didn't hesitate to turn around and flee towards another tunnel. The moment Klein's toes touched the ground, his body shot out like a cannonball as he pounced straight for Lanivas's back. At that moment, an image appeared in his mind. It seems as if Lanivas has no bones. I should force him to twist his upper body and land a punch on his body. This was a clown's intuition. Without any doubts or hesitation, Klein took the initiative to reduce his subsequent strength. With a smacking sound, he still threw himself forward, but it was much weaker than he expected. Cager. With a jarring noise, Lanivas twisted his upper body suddenly while his legs remained immobile. His face faced backward as his toes pointed forward. In such a terrifying scene, Lanivas threw a punch towards Klein's head. The force of the punch was so strong that even the air produced an explosive boom. Boom! His fist hit nothing but air, and his fist was still 20 or 30 centimeters from Klein's face. The winds that stirred from the punch blew through Klein's hair, but he didn't take the opportunity to attack the enemy. Instead, he croaked a single word in ancient Hermes, crimson. A charm. Lanivas scrunched his face as he immediately jumped to the side in a bid to dodge the impending attack. However, Klein had yet to throw out the charm. Instead, he clenched his left fist tightly and followed in the direction of Lanivas. He similarly threw himself to the side and rolled on the ground as well, causing the distance between them to only widen slightly. It was a bluff. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, the highly raised corners of the clown's mouth were clearly reflected in his eyes. There was also a dark red flame which had unknowingly ignited in the clown's left fist. This Lanivas's gaze immediately froze. A light crackling sound entered his ears, and a calm, tranquil feeling emanated instantly, enveloping him and Klein. What is he trying to do? He wants both of us to be affected at the same time to allow for the Nitorks and military to rush here in time. Lanivas's eyelids drooped heavily, and the fatigue and weakness he had been suppressing began to rear their heads uncontrollably. He did his best not to fall asleep, hoping to rely on the uniqueness of his body to endure through the most intense period of the charm's slumbering effects. As for Klein, he didn't choose to resist at all and quickly entered a deep slumber. However, whenever he fell asleep unnaturally, he would instinctively wake up. This was the unique thing about him when fighting mediumship and dream invasions. This was the reason why he had been lucky enough to escape from the hands of Madame Sharon back in Tingen. In the fight just now, after throwing his cards proved ineffective, he immediately took out the slumber charm and gripped it tightly in his palm, waiting for the opportunity to affect himself and his enemy. In just a split second, he forcibly broke free from the abnormal state of mind in his dream. The figure of the staggering Lanivas was clearly reflected in his eyes. Phew. Klein suddenly became very calm, as though what was before him was nothing but a target. He took a deep breath, turned his waist, and pulled back his shoulder before thrusting his fist forward with all his strength. Bam. Cager. His fist landed ruthlessly at Lanivas's throat, breaking his bones and splattering his flesh. Lanivas took 2 steps back and leaned against the wall. That intense pain finally allowed him to extricate himself from the slumbering effects, but the fine iron-colored gauzy bumps on his body were all gone. After Klein's punch landed, he reached into his pocket with his left hand and pulled out 2 cards. Two. The 2 cards each stabbed into an eye as scarlet liquid gushed out. Lanivas surprisingly endured the pain without letting out a tragic cry. Instead, he abruptly threw himself forward in a bid to make his last stand. Klein didn't take advantage of the situation to attack. Having long expected this, he turned his body to the side and took a step back. Right on the heels of that, while seizing the moment when Lanivas fell forward, he took 2 steps and arrived behind him. He reached out with his arms and grabbed his enemy's neck. Cager. Klein's arms exerted force, and he suddenly turned around, twisting Lanivas's neck. After doing all of this, he took 2 steps back and looked at his enemy. With the card embedded in him, Lanivas looked ahead weakly as he slumped to the ground. At the same time, he was very confused and asked in a staccato man, "Why do you want to kill me?" With his clown mask on, Klein stared at his archenemy and replied indifferently, "No reason." No, with his eyes wide open, Lanivas collapsed to the ground in the sewers, unable to accept his fate. Finally, his breathing came to a stop. At that moment, Klein, who seemed to be extremely calm, suddenly stepped forward, tightened his right leg, and, with all his strength, kicked him in the head. Bam. His neck, which was already badly mutilated, could no longer bear the pressure and was sent flying like a rubber ball. It slammed heavily into the wall, creating a red and white patch. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly crouched down. Ha ha ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. He laughed crazily with a suppressed voice. The clown mask looked so very happy. The corners of those raised lips, the bright red nose, and that white face wore a very happy expression. Ha ha, ha 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 ha. Klein laughed so much that he went out of breath. His laughter was more jarring than crying. After a few seconds, he finally calmed down. He slowly straightened his body and winked with his left eye at the darkest part of the sewer. Then, he smirked and muttered to himself, "Captain. Look, we've saved Lowen once again." Droplets of liquid quietly slid down and landed on his collar. At that moment, he felt that his clown potion had been digested completely. In the dark sewer, Klein wiped his neck and turned his attention back to Lanivas's cracked head and decapitated body before turning to the 2 tarot cards that were stuck in Lanivas's eyes. He originally wanted to retrieve all the projectiles that he had thrown and wipe the scene of any clues. However, he realized a very real and extremely serious problem. He didn't have the vision to see in complete darkness. He had relied on his spirit vision to rush through the pitch-black sewers and engage in the intense battle with Lanivas. He could see the colors of Lanivas's aura, the spirituality radiance of all sorts of critters, and could faintly use the light's illumination to distinguish the path. Unfortunately, the tarot cards he was currently using weren't the same as the ones that had originated from the Nitorks. It didn't have any spirituality or silver engravings, and it was completely ordinary with no special characteristics. In such an environment, Klein could use his own aura's color and spirituality radiance to create a tiny radius around him where he could distinguish things. However, he couldn't see the cards stuck in the walls and ground, as well as the cards that had scattered everywhere. In the intense battle with Lanivas, they hadn't restricted themselves to a particular spot. Of course, he believed that as long as he had enough time, it wouldn't be difficult to find all the cards he had thrown out. But the main problem was that the Nitorks and the military on board the airship would arrive at any minute. I can't be too careless regarding this. I've been wearing gloves all this time. This deck of tarot cards was bought before coming to Backland and is standard across the nation. I don't usually use it most of the time. Even if I have it with me, it's placed together with Mr. Azite's copy whistle. Regardless of what methods are used, it would be very difficult to locate me through them. At most, they would be able to restore a portion of the battle scene. I donned a mask, and my shoes are padded. All sorts of thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, and he quickly came to a decision. He turned to the headless corpse and crouched down. Reaching out with his black gloved right hand, he quickly searched for any items left behind. Klein didn't have the intention of carrying out a mediumship ritual. Firstly, the feeling of the evil god's descent had left a deep impression on him, so he didn't dare to blindly channel Lanivas's spirit unless he brought it above the grey fog with him. Secondly, with the situation of the Nitorks and military arriving at any time, he didn't feel that he had enough time to set up the ritual of summoning himself, responding to himself, and then going up above the grey fog and channeling the spirit. I should give up when it's necessary, Klein silently muttered to himself, and he withdrew his hand from Lanivas's body. This crazy swindler seemed to be in a hurry when escaping. He didn't bring any cash, or materials, or charms. He only had an eye-sized badge on him which coruscated a faint spirituality radiance. Clyde wasn't afraid that this item could be used to locate him, as he planned on throwing it above the grey fog later to study it slowly. Therefore, he stood up and put the badge in his pocket. He stole a glance at Lanivas's corpse, and without waiting for the beyond characteristic to appear, he used his left black-gloved hand to remove the remaining tarot cards. Then he stretched out his left arm and placed his palm directly above the Lanivas's corpse. All of a sudden, Klein released his grip, allowing the tarot cards to fall, like leaves cascading over the headless corpse. Some of them faced up with pictures and numbers printed on them, whilst others had dark red patterns on their backs. After doing all of this, Klein took out Azite's copy whistle and tossed it a few times. Then, without looking back, he ran deep into the sewers. After almost 2 minutes, figures finally arrived at this place. Some of them were wearing thick black windbreakers, while others were wearing well-tailored military uniforms. The leader of the group was Krestetsis Ymir, who was carrying a pure white bone sword. His red gloves were smeared with dust, and his determined face showed obvious signs of fatigue and frailty. They stopped a few meters away from the body, and through the means of their night vision, they could see Lanivas's corpse and his head against the wall. There were 2 tarot cards stuck in his head. One was the Emperor and the other was Wheel of Fortune. The headless body was covered with even more cards, each separately depicting the Chariot, the Hermit, Death, and more cards of different suits comprising of chalice, scepters, etc. On the walls and on the ground around him, there were also tarot cards such as the Devil, the Sun, and Judgment. It all looked like the scene of some bizarre ritual, and Lanivas was the sacrificial offering that was destined to be sacrificed. Krestetsis Ymir drew a silent gasp as he knitted his brows tightly. The Beyonders around him fell into a momentary daze at the sight of this frightening and mysterious scene in the darkness. Far away from the scene of Lanivas's death, Klein quickly found an exit and left. He took off his clown mask and, in the shadows of the gas lamps, walked quickly towards East Borough. Before that, he had already dealt with the stains on the soles of his shoes. It was only when he reached Black Palm Street in the East Borough did he breathe a slight sigh of relief. Then, he quickly held the ritual of summoning himself inside his rented one-bedroom apartment and responded to himself. In his spiritual body state, Klein moved all the clothes he had worn tonight, as well as the remaining charms, herbs, and essential oils, as well as the badge he had obtained from Lanivas to the space above the grey fog. Then, he used a spiritual flame to burn the corresponding clues. Few he exhaled and finally had time to take a look at what the badge he had taken from Lanivas looked like. This badge was only the size of an eyeball. On the front was a symbol that depicted fate and concealment, and behind it was a ring of tiny and compact words in ancient Hermes. You can join if you have this item. What does it mean? Was Lanivas also a member of some secret organization? Klein rubbed his temples, in a situation where he was physically and mentally exhausted, along with the fact that the timing wasn't right. He decided to give up on his research and leave it till after the Tarot Club's gathering. He quickly left the mysterious space above the grey fog, changed into another set of clothes, and removed his disguise. However, he was in no hurry to return to Minsk Street. He planned to sleep for the night before leaving. This was because it was easy to be inspected after midnight, especially when such an accident had just occurred. He lay down on the bed, looked out the window at the moonlight's encroaching of the darkness, and gradually calmed down. After completing his initial revenge, he felt that he had relieved himself of a lot of his burdens and lost a lot of his pressure. His mental state was clearly much better than before. The present me isn't capable of handling int Zangwil and sealed artifact 0-08. Besides, the gap between us is huge. Only after becoming a high-sequence Beyonder, a demigod, would I have the qualifications to involve myself in such matters before advancing to sequence 4, I'll act as though they don't exist. Yea, for the foreseeable future, my goal is to work hard to improve myself. Now that I've completely digested the clown potion, I can advance to magician once the Beyonder ingredients are gathered. There's still a faceless, Nimbrite master, and the corresponding sequence 4 which I don't know the name of. Other than that, I'll just be an ordinary detective. Klein's mind was calm and peaceful, and his thoughts were scattered as he thought about his future arrangements. He was no longer cranky or depressed. As he thought about it, the corners of his lips curled up slightly as he silently muttered to himself. Captain, Benson, Melissa, I believe all of you would prefer to see me like this. At dawn, a group of people wearing surgical hats and white masks came to the dock union's dormitory. They were all dressed as doctors. The elder in the lead appeared to be rich in experience as he said to the puzzled and confused residents, "We've discovered an infectious disease in this building. A person named Kevin has already passed away because of it. We will provide free treatment. This infectious disease has a special drug, and as long as you take it in time, you'll be fine." Kevin, one by one, the guests exclaimed in astonishment as they looked around for their colleague named Kevin. However, they didn't find him at all. That was Lanivas's alias. Seeing that the charity medical team was accompanied by police officers, the residents no longer had any doubts and began to line up nervously to collect their medicine. The first was a middle-aged man with a bushy beard. He nervously asked all sorts of questions, afraid that a single bottle of medicine wasn't potent enough to fight off the infectious disease. It wasn't until the doctors showed their impatience that he drank the blue bottle of medicine. Then, he was helped to the side and aimed his mouth at a hole that was of the same size. The man suddenly felt nauseous as he violently vomited a puke-head blob of a bloody substance. He was about to prop himself up and cast his gaze to see what he had just vomited when two strong nurses yanked him away. The mouth-sized hole was located above an iron black metal barrel. The bottom of the barrel was dark and deep, with almost no light coming from it. And right there, a pool of yellowish-green liquid was quietly resting at the bottom. In the middle of the pool was a small piece of blood-colored meat. One by one, the residents took the medicine and vomited in front of different metal barrels. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. "Why did you suddenly visit so early?" Audrey looked at the sky outside, then she looked at Viscount Glaint. Glaint looked around and only found a golden retriever sitting beside him. "Hence," he whispered, "I was planning to go to the Turf Club, but I met Guns on the way. He told me something very interesting. It's truly interesting. Since I was passing by here, I thought of coming to share it with you." "What is it?" Audrey asked with interest. Glaint didn't deliberate over his words as he replied, "You should have heard of the Aurora Order, right? It was the Aurora Order that assassinated the Empress Ambassador. They were caught, with several important members killed, and a very large ploy was foiled as a result. I thought it was something related to the godhood of the true creator. CO4 sent someone to report the information yesterday evening, and it just so happened that an operation was held last night. Wait, the Aurora Order apparently worships the true creator." Audrey's eyes lit up. She pressed in a reserved tone, "What ploy?" "I don't know," Kent refused to say. "He just told me that the person in charge of this ploy was once a wanted swindler, a swindler named Lanivas." Glaint spread out his right hand. As expected, Audrey nodded indiscernibly. She didn't conceal her curiosity and asked, "Was he caught?" "He's dead, but he wasn't killed by our people." Glaint paused for a moment. "This is what I meant by interesting. When his body was found, it was covered with many tarot cards. Same for the surroundings. You can imagine that scene. Tarot cards. The body was covered with tarot cards." Audrey was startled at first before it hit her. "This was done by our tarot club." It was Mr. Fool's adorer, Audrey, who thought she knew the truth, couldn't help but imagine the scene described by Viscount Glaint. Lanivas lying in the mud in the darkness, covered with rows and rows of tarot cards. There's the Fool, Justice, the Hanged Man, the Sun, the World, and the other major arcana cards, and numerous numbered cards. They would either be overturned or facing right up, and there would be some left unturned, exposing only their backs, as if they were all part of a large-scale, eerie tarot divination. This kind of scene must be very shocking. I wonder where the card for justice landed. How would the Beyonders of MI9 and the Church view this matter? Would they believe that a new secret organization has appeared? By possessing the godhood of the true creator, the ploy between Lanivas and the Aurora Order must definitely be significant. It definitely would have brought a terrible disaster to Backland and the kingdom. Yet, this ploy was so easily foiled because of a simple mission Mr. Fool had issued. This is a tussle at the level of deities. Mr. Fool and the true creator are considered archenemies. It's no wonder he calls the other party the fallen creator. Many thoughts flashed through Audrey's mind as her body trembled faintly and imperceptibly. "What are you thinking about?" Viscount Glaint, who was sitting opposite, finally couldn't hold it in any further as he asked in puzzlement. Audrey abruptly snapped out of her reverie. Slightly cocking her head, she smiled and said, "Didn't you tell me to imagine the scene of the corpse being covered with tarot cards?" "Ha ha." Glaint awkwardly smiled and sighed. "I wonder which secret organization's member killed Lanivas. It really matches how I imagined such things to be like. It's so cool." "It's our tarot club," Audrey answered silently as she smiled. "Perhaps there's no organization, but the independent act of a powerful beyonder. Regardless, I like this style. Urge CO4 and ask them when they can find my apothecary formula," Glaint said in excitement. Audrey widened her eyes slightly. Looking around her, she lowered her voice and said, "Hush, keep it down. How come you talk about potions here?" Glaint gave an indifferent smile. "Don't worry, it's nothing. I had already confirmed that other than you and me, there's only a dog." The huge golden retriever, Susie, unconsciously shifted her position. North Burrow in Backland. Inside a room beneath the St. Samuel Cathedral. Dally, who was wearing a black hooded robe and makeup with blue eyeshadow and red blush, gave off a charming yet cold feeling. She randomly found a seat and picked up the document on the table. She swept through it before her gaze suddenly froze. Her brows immediately furrowed, and she suppressed something as she asked, Lanivas, why wasn't I informed of this matter? Why didn't you inform me about the operation last night? Sitting at the seat of honor, Krestetsis Ymir, who had hidden his chin and lips back into his propped-up collar, says deeply, I was afraid that you wouldn't be able to control your emotions. That would have brought unnecessary danger to the operation, so I didn't get anyone to inform you. I can understand how you feel. An talk from the Tingen squad is currently undergoing guidance and training at the Holy Cathedral. He plans on joining the Red Gloves, and his performance is about equal to yours. But as the person in charge of the operation, and as a high-ranking deacon of the Netorks, I had to eliminate all unstable elements. Dally looked at the other Netork squad captains and deacons, and she sneered. Why do you think I won't be able to control my own emotions? I'm very calm and I won't act rashly. My anger will only erupt after Lanivas is caught. This is the professional bearing of a veteran Netork and a deacon. If I had caught Lanivas, I would let him know that men can be weak too. I would make sure that a cold, rotten, yet stiff corpse would be situated behind his buttocks. I would make sure that a pungent white bone filled with thorns would be situated in front of him. I'd make it so that those cold little fellows enter and leave his body wherever they can. Damn it, you actually managed to let him die just like that. Krestetsis Ymir looked at Dally calmly and sighed after silently listening to her until she was done. How long have you been putting up with it? Dally froze, then muttered in frustration, like a deflated ball, for a very long time. Sis Ymir attracted his gaze and cast them towards the other deacons and captains. Got anything? From our preliminary investigations, the person who killed Lanivas is a member of the Secret Order, a sequence 8 of the potion name, Clown. He's adept at using paper cards as flying knives, a deacon reported based on the findings. However, we are unable to confirm this guess. The tarot cards scattered across the corpse don't seem like they were concealing something. After all, the Beyonder didn't deal with the cards on the wall and in Lanivas's head. We all believe the final scene was more of a ritual or a symbolism. Therefore, we suspect that the Beyonder might belong to an organization we don't understand. Of course, the scene might also just be a personal preference of his. Sis Ymir nodded slightly and said, we can start from that point and proceed with a follow-up investigation. Any updates on the person who tipped us off? The charming middle-aged man, Ayle Hassan, flipped the papers in his hand and said, we investigated the person and discovered that his actions were directed by a bounty hunter. In the process of looking for the wanted criminal, Lanivas, the Belame's companion, was killed by a member of the Aurora Order. In order to exact revenge, she secretly carried out an investigation and eventually locked onto the target at the Workers' Alliance Tavern in East Bolane Dock. Based on the target's actions and lifestyle, she discovered Lanivas. Her actions have basically been verified by witnesses. There isn't anything strange about it. We also used Beyond the means to confirm that she has no connection with the person who killed Lanivas. She's in hiding now, and it's very hard to find her. Sis Ymir added while seemingly in thought, this fits very well with Lanivas's description, that the radical and innocent members of the Aurora Order were helping him out. Is there any problem with the reporter who did the interview at the Union that afternoon? Another captain of the Netorks reported, he was a fake reporter, and according to news from the police department. He's actually a private detective who had previously helped Mike Joseph of the Daily Observer. Joseph was investigating the murder of Saba. We suspect that he got some kind of lead, found the Dock Union, and disguised himself to get in touch with everyone who was suspected of being the killer. This guess has already been confirmed by Zingardist and Tom. Sis Ymir acknowledged it before switching to ask about other people who had recently come into contact with Lanivas, but similarly got answers that there was nothing wrong with them. Towards the end, he said after some deliberation, I'm very confused by the lack of motive for the murder of Lanivas. That mysterious murderer deserves our attention. You should continue the follow-up on this matter. In addition, according to common sense, the Aurora Order definitely wouldn't only have Beyonders at the Rose Bishop and Shadow Ascetic level in a big city like Backland. There should at least be an oracle, or perhaps even a saint. Their ploy of receiving the true Creator's descent has failed. With their crazy and irrational traits, I'm worried that they'll launch a series of retaliatory acts. All of you are to be on high alert in the near future. I'll also be staying in Backland. Yes, Your Grace, the deacons and captains replied solemnly. Krestetsis Ymir paused for a few seconds before adding, the events of the Megos incident in Tingen and last night's incident with Lanivas have revealed a problem. The industrial area, the dock area, and East Borough have become hotbeds for the descent and nurturing of evil gods. You are to send people to investigate and gather the truth about the situation. If it truly is as Lanivas had described, I'll raise this matter at the Council of Cardinals, formally exerting pressure on the kingdom and the government to bring about the corresponding changes as soon as possible. Klein slept in and didn't wake up until it was late. However, it still wasn't bright enough outside. The area was still shrouded in fog, making it dark and cold. This doesn't fit with my splendid mood, he grumbled. After changing his clothes and taking his key, he returned to Minsk Street unnoticed. After changing from his worker's uniform to casual home attire, a shirt and sweater, and after confirming that no one came investigating his identity as a private detective, he was completely at ease. He leisurely went out to the butcher and grocery store to buy food in preparation for a sumptuous lunch for himself. There was some afternoon sun in Backland, and Klein lazily basked in its worth, momentarily having no desire to do anything. He waited until 15 minutes to 3, then he took out his golden pocket watch for a glance before returning to the bedroom and going above the grey fog. After conjuring the fake world and familiarizing himself with its controls, he sat down on the high back chair at one end of the table and gave a message to the sun that he was to prepare for his participation in the gathering. At precisely 3, according to Backland time, streaks of crimson light soared out of the vast and ancient palace, outlining blurry figures which were equally indistinct. Audrey directly looked towards the seat of honor and said cheerfully, "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool. The simple mission you entrusted has been completed." She had deliberately emphasized the word simple in order to ascertain from Mr. Fool whether Lanivus had really been eliminated by his adorer. She wanted to know if the tarot card-covered death scene was a symbol of the tarot club. Klein deliberately acted composed as he said with a smile, "I'm already aware." After saying that, he sighed. In such an age, in such a place like Backland, in such a place in the East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district, that are hotbeds for an evil god's descent. What? Aljo was stunned for a moment, wondering if there was something wrong with his ears. Why would a simple mission involve hotbeds for an evil god's descent? I remember that the simple mission given by Mr. Fool was for the sole purpose of examining 2 people for their candidacy of joining the gathering. The general idea was to find the person in the portrait, and that person was confirmed to be in Backland. Aljo Wilson tried to remember what had happened the last gathering, and he couldn't understand what it had to do with the hotbed of an evil god's descent. Wasn't it just the search for someone? Furthermore, it was the kind of task which didn't pose much of a threat. Was there a deeper purpose behind Mr. Fool's simple mission? Was this a silent contest between deities? Many thoughts went through the hanged man's mind instantly, and he almost couldn't stop himself from asking Justice, tempted to pay in order to understand what exactly was going on. However, as a veteran official beyonder, a seafarer who steered an ancient ghost ship, he was experienced and shrewd. He forcefully suppressed his impulse and planned to go through the internal channels of the Church of the Lord of Storms to find out about the recent events in Backland. As for Audrey, she instantly understood what Mr. Fool's sigh meant. She immediately understood the entire situation regarding Lanivus. So it turns out that the bit of godhood that Lanivus possessed was the basic foundation for the descent of the true creator into the real world. The harsh situation in East Borough, the dock area, and the factory area, however, was a hotbed that provided him rapid nurturing and strengthening with a simple mission. Mr. Fool stopped the true creator's great conspiracy and saved the whole of Backland. Audrey looked towards the end of the long bronze table, her eyes sparkling brightly. Unconsciously, she brimmed with admiration. At this moment, the gloomy and reserved world let out a chuckle and said, "Yes, every time I see and hear about a large number of child laborers dying in their teens, and how most workers rarely live past 30 due to extreme exhaustion and the terrible environment, or how after barely surviving the previous tests and as a result of their old age and the loss of their jobs, they can only wander the streets and die of hunger and cold. I have no doubt about the existence of an evil god. These gods are on the ground, in East Borough, the dock area, and the factory area. Well, there's even been a report that some factory workers have a hard time surviving 5 years. In the East Borough of Backland, there's a saying that among the people who live there, without exception, any person who's a grandfather must be from the countryside. The meaning of this sentence is that people living won't have a 3rd generation as they can't have grandchildren. Poverty and hunger make their children very thin. Work that's difficult to adapt to causes them to quickly wither away in Backland, much less getting married and conceiving the next generation. This was the first time Audrey heard Mr. World speak so much. She was suddenly plunged into deep shock and confusion. Why don't I know anything about this? The newspapers and magazines I read only mention that the residents of East Borough are having a hard time. This is far worse than being laborious. Audrey's eyes lost their focus for a moment. She felt as if her understanding of the kingdom and the world had been completely overturned. Suddenly, she understood why Mr. Fool had uttered such a sigh, and why in such an age, such a Backland, in such an East Borough, the dock area, and the factory district were the hotbeds of an evil god's descent. We can't go on like this, otherwise, Backland will one day be destroyed because of this. Audrey felt a strong urge to go back and learn more, to remind her father, Count Hall. She wanted to use the powers of a spectator and a telepathist to secretly guide the governmental policies that would improve the lives of the pitiful people in East Borough, the docks area, and the factory district. At the end of the long bronze table, Klein quietly observed Miss Justice's reaction. He had purposely lamented a while ago and used his Smurf, the world, to give a detailed explanation. He wanted this noble, one who still had a semblance of purity, to realize the seriousness of the problem and use her to push for change in the kingdom. Before I become faceless, I must clearly remember that I cannot be personally involved in such matters. He silently set such a boundary for himself. Thank you, Mr. Fool. Thank you for saving Backland. Your sigh has made me understand the problem at its roots. Thank you, Mr. World. You have made me understand a great deal of the situation I didn't know in the past. Audrey held back her emotions and sincerely thanked the 2 gentlemen at the 2 ends of the table. Saved Backland, Aljo was no stranger to the conditions of East Borough, the factory district, and the dock area. He was more surprised by the description Miss Justice had used. Just how huge was this matter? He thought with an extremely puzzled frown. The son, on the other hand, listened quite attentively, and although he couldn't understand all of it, he still listened attentively, hoping to learn more about the regions where Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and Mr. World were located. Klein only smiled in response to Miss Justice's gratitude and didn't do anything further. He then turned to look at the Hanged Man. Alger immediately understood what he meant, and he quickly conjured the last page of the promised Roselle's diary. Klein received it out of thin air and took a casual glance at it. The 14th of January, I discovered a problem. If unconscious high-sequence beyonder objects are not sealed, they would unconsciously attract nearby low-sequence beyonders from the same pathway, causing them to come into contact with each other. The higher the original sequence, the more likely that this will happen. However, this situation doesn't seem to be a constant. It seems to be intermittent. This diary entry immediately jolted Klein to attention because he had made similar guesses before. After he came to the backland, he soon found himself intertwined with the secret order, with the beyonder of the seer pathway, and thus found himself in an extremely passive and extremely dangerous situation. However, he had also obtained the corresponding sequences 7, 6, and 5 potion formulas as a result. At the time, he had suspected that his transmigration involved secrets that gave him the power to resurrect, and that he would occasionally attract people and objects related to the seer pathway, such as the Antigonus family's notebook or members of the secret order. After seeing this diary entry of Emperor Roselle, Klein suddenly had a new idea. He used the corner of his eyes to scan the thick grey fog and the illusory dark red stars below him. He muttered to himself in silence. Could it be that the one who created that attractive force wasn't me, but this grey fog, the mysterious space above the grey fog? This could also be considered as a secret behind my transmigration. Without any further clues or information, Klein quickly gathered his thoughts and read the second diary entry. The 16th of January, the taste of a demoness still isn't bad. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched, unsure of what expression he should show. Emperor, I have underestimated you. There's really nothing stopping you. Don't you care about the other person's previous gender? Don't you care about her experience during the pleasure phase? Suppressing the urge to exhale, Klein looked at the last entry in the diary in his hands. The 20th of January, I finished making the second card of blasphemy. Let me think. Where should I hide it? Yes, I plan to disguise it as a bookmark and insert it into a very valuable book. If the person who obtains it isn't someone fated, it would be hard to imagine that the most valuable thing in the book is actually that seemingly ordinary bookmark. Not bad, that's a good idea. Emperor, why can't you explain more clearly? Which book did the bookmark go into? Before I read this, I was so happy thinking that I can follow the clues and obtain a card of blasphemy containing the profound secrets of the deities. Klein was disappointed and let his gaze linger on the last paragraph. I hope that there will be more specific information in the future entries of the Emperor's diary. He comforted himself with this sentence, leaned back, and said with a smile, You can start your discussion freely now. At that moment, the son Derek raised his hand, having learned it from Miss Justice, and said, Mr. World, the beyond the weapon you gave me far exceeds my expectations. I've already accumulated enough contribution points to trade for the ingredients to advance to sequence 8. I'll use the remaining contribution points to hire helpers to obtain a chance to obtain the true root and juice of the miscreant. I'll be able to complete the deal soon. He explained in great detail, worried that his reputation of keeping his word would be suspected and destroyed. Of course, he was telling the truth. Although the axe didn't match some of his expectations for a beyond a weapon, its power shocked him. That axe can create a powerful lightning bolt in just 2 or 3 strikes, and with the temporary boost from my bard's powers, I can easily fight in close quarters with the sequence 7 monster. If I were to encounter a monster that's afraid of lightning, I could even easily finish it. I'm now a light suppliant with a certain level of magical spells. My strength has been raised qualitatively, and I can fight against even more powerful monsters. Derek Berg felt that he had fallen in love with that beyond a weapon. In the City of Silver, its potency was one of the reasons to like it. The surrounding darkness and monsters in the depths of the darkness forced them to obey this rule for generations. All right, the gloomy world nodded under Klein's control. He then looked around and asked again, Lady, sirs, do you have any clues regarding the dark patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or spring of the Elves Marrow crystals? Audrey shook her head without hesitation. After musing for a few seconds, Alger suddenly said, There will be a grand event held on the Sonia Sea soon. Ships from the 4 pirate kings and the 6 pirate admirals will be participating. Hey, I should call them the 7 pirate admirals. Another person has joined the ranks. There'll definitely be transactions of beyonder ingredients at such an event. It's very likely that the not very rare dark patterned Black Panther spinal fluid or spring of the Elves Marrow crystals will appear. I have the opportunity to participate in this event, but what can you offer in exchange? I'm sure you don't have a potion formula for Wind Blessed, and that it'll be very difficult for you to find it in the future too.